Ready for a deep dive into note-taking? We're exploring Fiona McPherson's book, Effective Note-Taking today, going way beyond just writing down bullet points.
So often we just go through the motions of note-taking, but understanding why these strategies work makes all the difference.
We've all been there, right? Pages and pages of notes, and nothing sticks.
If we grasp at the limits of working memory, we can work with our brains, not against them.
Let's talk working memory.
Imagine juggling, but you can only keep so many balls in the air at once.
Some days it feels like I can only handle one thought at a time, pull on a bunch.
Research says we can hold like 4 things in focus, maybe 3 more on deck.
Hold on, so the length of time to say the information matters too?
It's not just how many items, but the time to verbalize them, so faster talkers have a bit of an edge.
Interesting. So good note-taking isn't about cramming in every single detail.
It's about focusing on what's important and making it easy for our brains to process it.
Speaking of focus, let's talk about highlighting.
It can be a trap. I think we've all been there, highlighting entire chapters and still blanking on the test.
McPherson's research actually suggests highlighting can be bad if you do too much of it.
Like a city where every building is painted in neon, you lose sight of what matters.
Highlighting works best when you're fully focused. The material isn't too dense and you have plenty of time.
Don't highlight everything. It's about finding the key points and separating them from the rest.
So it's a tool for directing focus, but not a replacement for understanding.
Now let's talk about headings, another common note-taking element.
Everyone uses them, but why are some more effective than others? What makes a heading good?
An effective heading should summarize the main idea of that section. It's like a signpost on the highway guiding you.
Like driving on a highway with clear signs versus one with confusing or missing ones, headings help our brains navigate the information.
They encourage what McPherson calls a topic structure strategy.
So we remember not just the topics, but the information that goes with them.
It helps tie everything together.
Let's move on to elaboration, going beyond just the basic fact.
We're wired for connections. We understand new things by relating them to what we already know.
So how do we elaborate well?
There are 3 ways: comparisons, questions, and mnemonics.
Comparisons make sense. When we compare and contrast, we think critically.
McPherson points out the power of looking for differences, not just similarities.
It's the little details that often make the biggest difference.
And then there's mutual alignment, where you analyze multiple examples to find common structures.
Like when I finally understood a difficult scientific concept by comparing it to a recipe.
Analogies are powerful tools. They bridge the gap between the new and the familiar.
And then we have mnemonics, those memory tricks that help us remember things. I'm sure our listeners have some favorites.
We'll dive deeper into those later. But for now, let's move on to a technique that uses visuals concept maps.
I'll admit I struggled with concept maps at first, but now I see their value, especially for complex topics.
They visually show the connections between ideas, a roadmap for your mind.
Like a map of a city, showing not just the landmarks, but the routes connecting them.
A good concept map has a clear structure with labels explaining the relationships between concepts.
You can adjust the complexity, and the process of making one is just as valuable as the map itself.
It forces you to think about how ideas relate to one another.
We've covered a lot of insightful note-taking strategies.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
Stick around for part 2, where we'll delve deeper into mnemonics and other memory-boosting techniques.
Back to our exploration of note-taking, let's pick up where we left off with elaboration techniques.
We were about to talk about mnemonics, those memory tools.
Everyone has their favorites, right?
Definitely.
Mnemonics work by linking new information to something you already know, making it easier to remember, like acronyms, rhymes, or even pictures.
Like Roy G. BIV for the colors of the rainbow. I use that one all the time in school.
A classic example, they can be really helpful for lists, sequences, or complicated ideas, especially when you personalize them.
So if I wanted to memorize the planets, I could make a silly sentence with the first letter of each word representing a planet.
Exactly. The more outlandish, the better. Our brains remember things that are unusual or stand out. McPherson emphasizes making them interactive and engaging.
So it's not just passively reading a list, it's about actively creating those connections.
Let's switch gears to another powerful elaboration technique, asking questions. Not just any questions, but ones that make you really think about the material.
We talked about this a little earlier, but what makes a question good for elaboration?
The key is asking why questions. These force you to make connections, understand the reasons behind things, and really integrate the information.
So instead of just writing down that arteries carry oxygenated blood, I might ask myself, why do arteries carry oxygenated blood? And then explore how that relates to the heart's function.
You got it. That why question takes you beyond just memorizing a fact to understanding the process.
McPherson calls this elaborative interrogation.
It's a very effective method, especially if you already have some background knowledge.
Because you have those mental makers to connect the new information to.
For those without much background, McPherson suggests creating visual aids that link the new information to something familiar.
Like building a bridge between the known and the unknown.
McPherson also talks about another questioning technique, self-explanation.
What's the difference between that and elaborative interrogation?
With elaborative interrogation, you focus on asking why questions. With self-explanation, you explain the information to yourself as if you were teaching someone else.
So I'd be summarizing, clarifying, and making connections out loud.
That's it, like having a conversation with yourself about the material, forcing you to articulate your understanding and spot any gaps.
I can see how that would really solidify learning.
Research backs it up. Self-explanation is a great way to boost both comprehension and retention.
So we've talked about elaboration techniques. Now, what about putting them into practice?
This is where choosing the right note-taking format comes in. There's no single best method.
It depends on the material, your learning style, and what you're aiming for.
We talked about concept maps, which are great for visual learners and for showing complex relationships.
But sometimes you need something more linear and structured. That's where outlines come in.
They're perfect for hierarchical information, breaking a topic down into main points and subpoints.
But McPherson points out that outlines aren't always the best for long-term recall or deep understanding.
They can sometimes encourage rote memorization without those meaningful connections.
So choosing a format that matches your goals is essential. If you're memorizing facts for a quiz, an outline might be enough. But for grasping a complex theory, a concept map or mind map might be better.
The key is to experiment and find what works best for you.
Let's talk about a situation that many learners dread: lectures. Taking good notes during a fast-paced lecture can be tough.
It's definitely challenging, McPherson says. Successful lecture note-taking requires a different mindset than working with written text.
Because you can't control the pace or go back if you miss something.
You're at the mercy of the speaker. Your working memory is working overtime processing information while trying to write down the important points.
So how can we avoid ending up with a jumbled mess of notes that make no sense later?
McPherson offers a few tips. First, be prepared. Familiarize yourself with the topic beforehand by doing assigned readings or reviewing old notes.
So you have a foundation to build on.
Second, focus on capturing the main points. Don't try to write down everything word for word. Use abbreviations, symbols, or any shorthand that works for you.
It's all about speed and efficiency.
Third, use visual cues whenever possible. Diagrams, charts, or even quick sketches can help you remember better than words alone.
And don't be afraid to leave space in your notes. You can always go back and add details later.
If you can record the lecture, that can be super helpful.
It allows you to go back and clarify anything you missed or fill in the blanks.
But even the best lecture notes are just the beginning.
The real learning happens after the lecture, when you review and process the information.
McPherson stresses the importance of active retrieval practice.
Meaning testing yourself on the material without looking at your notes.
That's right, it strengthens those neural connections and makes the information stick.
Like working out a muscle, the more you use your recall abilities, the stronger they get.
The other key element of review is spaced repetition.
Revisiting the material at spaced intervals.
Exactly. It fights against forgetting and keeps the information fresh in your mind.
So instead of cramming the night before an exam, it's better to review regularly over time.
Well-organized, elaborated notes are super helpful for that.
They become your guide for relative sessions.
They make retrieval practice and spaced repetition much more effective. We've explored so many techniques and strategies, from highlighting and headings to elaboration and review.
Before we wrap up, let's think about the bigger picture. What are the goals of effective note-taking?
The ultimate goals are to reduce cognitive load, enhance comprehension, and improve memory retention.
Let's break those down. Cognitive load is how much mental effort it takes to process information.
And effective note-taking helps us manage that cognitive load by organizing, clarifying, and reducing the mental juggling.
So we're offloading some of that mental work onto our notes.
By making the information easy to process, we free up mental space for deeper understanding.
Which brings us to comprehension.
When we're not overwhelmed, we can see patterns, make connections, and truly understand what we're learning.
Like putting together a puzzle. When the pieces are organized, the picture becomes clear.
And finally, effective note-taking should help us remember things better. By actively processing information, making connections, and reviewing regularly, we create lasting memories.
It's about building a knowledge base that we can use in the future.
Effective note-taking is an investment in our learning and understanding.
I like that perspective. It reframes note-taking from a chore to a tool for empowerment. So we've covered the nuts and bolts of note-taking, but what about the person doing the learning?
We're all different. What works for one person might not work for another.
McPherson talks a lot about individual differences, how things like cognitive style, motivation, and even the environment can affect how well we take notes.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's about finding what fits your brain.
Let's start with cognitive style, how we process information.
Some people are visual learners, others are verbal or kinesthetic.
And this affects what note-taking format we prefer. Visual learners might like concept maps, while verbal learners might prefer outlines.
It's about finding a format that matches how our brains work.
McPherson also talks about how a cognitive style affects how we approach a text. Some people are holists. They like to see the big picture first.
Others are analytics. They like to work through the details systematically.
A holist might skim a summary before diving in. An analytic might go step by step.
Understanding our cognitive style can help us tailor our note-taking.
Motivation also matters. Let's be honest, note-taking can be boring, especially if you're not interested in the subject.
Motivation affects how deeply we engage with information. McPherson talks about surface learning, where you just memorize facts, versus deep learning, where you try to understand and make connections.
And our note-taking strategies will be different depending on our approach. My notes for a quick quiz will look different from notes when I'm really fascinated by a topic.
Finding ways to make note-taking fun and relevant is key. It's about tapping into that intrinsic motivation.
Like if I'm studying history and I'm a visual learner, I could create timelines or maps.
Or if you're a verbal learner, you could write summaries or make flashcards.
It's about finding what sparks your interest.
McPherson also mentions environmental preferences.
Right, some people need absolute silence to focus, while others can work in a noisy coffee shop.
Our surroundings can really affect how well we think. Some people are easily distracted, while others need that stimulation.
It's all about self-awareness and creating the best environment for you.
So we've talked about these individual differences. What are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Effective note-taking isn't about following rules blindly. It's about understanding why certain techniques work and adapting them to fit our own needs.
We need to know our working memory limits, focus on what's important, and use strategies that make us actively process and elaborate.
Choose a format that matches your cognitive style and learning goals, whether it's an outline, a concept map, or something else.
And most importantly, make note-taking engaging and meaningful.
When we're interested in what we're learning, note-taking becomes a tool for understanding, not a chore.
Before we finish, McPherson says that memories aren't fixed. They change every time we use them.
So if our memories are always being reshaped, what does that mean for how we learn and remember?
It's an interesting question. It suggests that learning is an ongoing process, and our notes can help us along the way.
They're not just about capturing information, but about documenting our evolving understanding.
Why don't you try out one of the strategies we talked about today and see how it works for you?
Let's recap the 10 key points we covered in this deep dive.
Number 1, working memory is limited, so effective note-taking strategies need to work with that.
Number 2, use highlighting strategically to focus, not to color the entire page.
Number 3, effective headings are like signposts. They guide us through the text and help us remember.
Number 4, elaboration is about making connections to enhance understanding and memory.
Number 5, concept maps are great for showing the relationships between ideas.
Number 6, asking why questions is a simple but powerful way to deepen your understanding.
Number 7, just because you wrote it down doesn't mean you learned it.
Number 8, effective review involves testing yourself and spicing out your study sessions.
Number 9, note-taking can reduce cognitive load by organizing information and getting it out of your head.
And finally, number 10, choose the right note-taking strategy for you based on your learning style, the material, and your goals.
The best strategies are the ones that work for you.
We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into effective note-taking and feel inspired to try out these techniques.
Happy note-taking!